Well, welcome back to our podcast here at All Access. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited for our guest today. This has been a really fun program to come alongside and just a really interesting model, and I'm excited to dive deeper into it today. So today we have Joy Kauffman, founder of Farm Stew, with us. And Joy, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's so great to be with you, Lane, and it's been awesome knowing you for the last year, and look forward to getting to know some of the people that follow you as well through this podcast.
Yeah, well, I really want to spend a lot of time hearing more about the model because it's so unique what you guys are doing, and there's a lot of stuff happening, but there's a reason why you do it that way. Before we do that, remind me of like your background and kind of the origin story of Farm Stew.
Yeah, so I am a public health nutritionist, and what that means, I studied undergrad in nutrition and then later went back and got my master's in public health, happily from Johns Hopkins University. And yeah, it's been my passion really my whole life to combine like health, and agriculture has always been a piece of it, and then my faith. And so food, faith, and farming coming together.
Nice. Well, then, so tell me about like what you were doing before Farm Stew, what led you to start it, and what that was like starting it.
Yeah, so the origin story starts very young. I got into nutrition kind of as a child, really, with my grandmother being very concerned when I decided to become a vegetarian at age 8 and finalized it at age 9. So she thought I was going to be malnourished. So suddenly I would go to health food stores with my mom and learn all about, pick up things and read about nutrition. And then, she thought I was going to be sickly and stunted. And a decade later, I was getting a full ride volleyball scholarship to Virginia Tech. So I was neither
I didn't know that.
Stunted.
Wow.
So, and then I was like filling out what I was going to major in, and I really didn't know. And then all of a sudden I saw, hey, nutrition, that's an option. And I'm excited because from the very beginning of nutrition, I had a passion for those that lack food. And I had gotten exposed to that while in high school by my dad, who was an engineer. He got involved in water and sanitation in developing countries. And he had gone on a trip to Ethiopia. And I had heard these stories, and I was like, wow, it was like late 80s, Ethiopia, the whole crisis of their famine. And that was kind of my first exposure to really the need for international development work. And so I was able to study nutrition with a focus in international development. And yeah, fast forward a few years, I did some international work, but ended up back in Washington, D.C., accompanying my sister on a journey she went on, health crisis related journey, and worked for various nonprofits in some really cool roles, working on nutrition in inner city DC. And then, was led to do the Master's in Public Health. From there, I went to Health and Human Services. I was a presidential management fellow at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and loved it, and then became a mom and got to learn real health and human services on the 24/7 kind.
Yeah.
As you know, Lane, being a parent of young children. So I was blessed to stay home with my kids for the next decade. And during that time, helped with a family business. And my husband and I had some blessings to be rewarded financially for some family business we were working on. And so I became a donor, actually, to a couple international nonprofits, and ended up getting on the board of one of them that was helping smallholder farmers in developing countries. So it's exactly my sweet spot and my passion. They asked me to be on the board, and lo and behold, that turned into an opportunity to go with USAID on a short-term program in Uganda in October of 2015. And that's where the story of Farm Stew really got rolling, was during that trip I took to Uganda.
So what was it on that trip that got Farm Stew rolling?
Yeah, well, I had done a lot of research. I wanted to understand what I was getting into, and what my assignment was looking at soybeans, actually, and working with a farmers cooperative of 60,000 farmers. And they wanted them to help learn how to use soy better for their own nutrition, but also for enterprise. And when I got there, well, before I got there, I realized, 1/3 of the children in sub-Saharan Africa at that time were severely malnourished, and Uganda was no different. And that really a lot of what they're lacking was certain micronutrients and proteins, and many of which the soybeans could provide. And so it was really a passion for me to get that message out in such a way that people could really use it, even in the poorest, most remote villages, which is, where Lane, you and I, our heart comes together in those places. And so I started teaching these hands-on cooking classes, just going out in the villages. And I had this guy who was a translator and realized pretty quickly it didn't make sense for me to say the same thing every single day over and over again while he translated, because it just took time. And so even within the first week, I was already what you'd call training the trainer. So my translator was quickly becoming the trainer. And I could just see the enthusiasm when he was doing such a good job facilitating. And then another guy came and started volunteering, and he was facilitating. And the kids, what really got me was, you can't really pay a kid in the United States enough to eat a just cooked soybean. Most kids would be like, oh, no, thank you. The kids were like literally jumping up and down, begging their mothers for these beans that were just cooked beans. And amazingly, the people had been growing these beans for the, many decades, but it was like a cash crop. They just sold it as if it was like coffee or tea or soybeans. And so they, in general, were not consuming it, except for in like a roasted form that small kids couldn't eat. And yet it's those small children that need it the most. And so, just to see these kids like literally jumping up and down, begging for these beans, and knowing that so many of them are going to die unnecessarily. And even if they don't die, they're going to be stunted both physically and mentally because of malnutrition. And it's like, I realized I can do something about this. And then the next thought is, but I have kids of my own. I got to go home. And I want to go home eventually. And so then I just thought about these guys that are sitting there training and facilitating so effectively. And it's like, it just came together in prayer. And I felt like God just said, you got to hire the local people. And so that's what I did. And that was almost 10 years ago. And praise God, they're still doing the work. And now it's spread to a lot of countries all around the world, including South Sudan, where you and I connected.
Right. Yeah, that is where we connected. So I came across Farm Stew on the South Sudanese NGO forum. So, my job is start with the data, look at the most impoverished places, and South Sudan is top of the charts. It's so top of the charts that even just getting data on South Sudan is really hard and dangerous. So it tells you kind of the state of South Sudan. So it's my job to go and find, what are the most effective programs working in South Sudan? The South Sudanese NGO Forum had 372 organizations on it. There's not a ton of other great data on orgs that work in South Sudan because of the civil war and the state of South Sudan. NGOs avoid working in South Sudan because it is difficult. But I came across, Farm Stew on there, and I remember because the name was so unique. I was like, I wonder what that is. Started, looking under the hood of all of these organizations, and we partnered with 2 in South Sudan that year, and you guys were one of them. The other one was Aqua Africa, but it was just the more I looked under the hood, just the more impressive the model was. And I wanted you to kind of share more about the model of Farm Stew, because it's very unique. And I think it's difficult. There's a lot of moving parts, but if we really want to lift people out of poverty, coming in with just one little solution isn't usually the fix. It takes multiple. It's multi-dimensional. So tell us a little bit about the Farm Stew model.
Well, I'm thrilled to do so. And I also do want to give you credit for helping me be able to articulate it as well as I can at this point, because it is holistic, it is complex, and yet I've been working with you now for quite some time and really have helped us be able to hone in and articulate it well. So what Farm Stew does is we are a training program that equips families to move from extreme poverty to abundant life, and especially the abundant life that Jesus offers. And John 10:10 is our theme verse. We know that Jesus wants us to have abundant life. And sadly, we also know that there's a thief that comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And so we are focusing on a range of activities that will stop the thief's activities. And so, yeah, basically the trainers go out week after week into the villages, and they're doing activities related to our 8 ingredients, we call it, in the recipe for abundant life. They're teaching fruitful farming, positive attitude, refreshing rest, nutritious meals, that spells farm, especially if you do it in the right order, and then proper sanitation, wise temperance, profitable enterprise, and clean water. And so they're teaching on all of those 8 modules. We have a curriculum that's 400-page training modules, 400-page manual that has 8 training modules in those 8 letters. And so, yeah, so what we're trying to achieve through these teachings and trainings locally is at the household level, we want transformation to occur. And that transformation is going to result in specific things that we can see and measure that will show that we are combating hunger, disease, poverty, and hopelessness, and doing it in such a way that we have long-term sustainability. So that's kind of a mouthful. I didn't do it as succinctly as I'd like, but hunger, disease, poverty, and hopelessness is what we are fighting. And we're doing so very effectively.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to follow, part of my struggle as we're trying to reduce these poverty levels. We look at the multidimensional poverty index. That's the same thing that the UN, when the UN says poverty, that's what they're looking at. It looks at these 10 indicators, water and assets and nutrition and education. But typically when we find organizations, they address like one of them, and which is great. But there's 9 other ones that they don't address. So even if we drill wells and do all this, and great, now they have access to safe drinking water, they still struggle with nutrition. They still don't have schools to go to, or they may not have income or access to jobs, or the dad may still be drunk and beating the family. I mean, so there's always a number of things where you come across you guys and you address virtually all of those indicators. You're training the families how to do it themselves, as opposed to coming in and like they're always dependent on the Farm Stew program. You're teaching them over several years how to do this themselves, how to grow nutritious food, how to why it's important to have a good attitude and behave well, both socially and in the home, discipleship, you name it. And you walk alongside them for 2 years using locals, which I had the opportunity, I guess the year before last, to go to South Sudan and meet your team in person. And it was just really encouraging. So yeah, all I have to say, Joy, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's pretty, from our perspective, it was pretty neat. And especially when you look at, the cost per impact, which is really important to us.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say I love, and I feel so thankful and honored that you found us, Lane, and 300 and something NGOs in South Sudan alone, and to be sort of found by All Access, and then also, to be one of the 9 in your portfolio at that time. It just feels like such an honor, and it's really exciting to me because I truly believe that the model that we have is working. And I've seen it firsthand. I see the reports all the time. We talk to most of our countries every other week or every week when they're getting started. And I mean, just to get the stories back, like I'm sometimes just flooded with them. And, we produce a quarterly donor newsletter. So it's like, financial report you get quarterly. Every quarter, we've been doing that since 2017. And it's like, to me, what's so exciting is just like that we really do have a holistic solution, and it's all Bible-based. And so what we're really proving here is not just that the farm stew model works, but that the word of God is powerful and effective. And wow, like what an amazing thing to be part of.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Who would have thought, that God knew, how humanity should live.
Amen.
So it's really cool. I really want to talk about the program specifically, and because it completed as one of the few in our portfolio that we've seen, from start to end. But before we do that, could you share more about your own experience with South Sudan? I don't think people really understand the gravity of the state there, and very few of us, like you and I, have actually been there.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, when you think about all the countries you've been to, when you think about northern Uganda, South Sudan, what's happening there, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I've never shared this comparison exactly, but as you were just asking me this question, the picture in my mind that just came to my mind is there was a picture many years ago where a photographer took a picture of a young girl sitting there like starving, and there was like a vulture that was about to come up and it looked like going to eat her. Yeah. You're nodding, so you remember, and maybe your listeners also remember. Well, that guy who took that picture, he ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize, and he ended up committing suicide.
Yeah.
It was like so overwhelmingly painful that he just didn't even know what to do with it. And honestly, that is what you can see in South Sudan. You go out into these villages and it's just dirt. I mean, just red, blown, hot dirt flying in your face and on the bodies of the children. And you see the orange hair, which for me as a nutritionist, I know that's a protein deficiency right there. Right. You see the bloated stomachs. You see they're barefoot and sometimes naked. And it's like overwhelmingly sad. And then you also can see like all these little alcohol bottles, which Farm Stew addresses temperance, that we address alcoholism, which almost no NGO does that. And we have a biblical basis for doing so. And then I guess just on the flip side, what I've also been able to see is literally communities where those dirty, ragged, totally ill children are now living a vibrant, abundant life. And their parents are standing there next to them with the pride and the dignity of having worked the Farm Stew model, having gardens, having hand washing stations so the stomachs are not bloated with worms, having an income and going to school and, getting to have the type of life that you and I want for our kids or your listeners might want for their grandkids, And so it's like, I just praise God that I know we're just called to do our part of the work. I mean, the overwhelmingly suffering, overwhelming level of suffering and pain that there is in this world. Sometimes I just have to remember that, God knows all of it. And as much as I get exposed to parts of it and it's painful, he actually experiences the pain at a level that I can't even fathom. And yet his response is that he calls his followers to do something about it. And so the joy of being able to actually do something about it just, overwhelms that sense of despair that you could have, and rightfully so. And so that's, for me, it's like, it is hard to describe. And often I'm not even given the time when I, given time to give speeches, which I love, but usually I'm given such a short amount of time that I don't even get to feel what I've just felt in describing that to you. It is painful. And I know you walk through that pain too, Lane, and doing the work you are called to do. And thank God for that.
Yeah, it is. You really can't. I mean, we look at a lot of numbers, and I remember telling a group in the fall the reason we are so bent on numbers because they represent real people. And some of those are my friends that I've now met as I've traveled around who fall in those categories from my time in Haiti and then, in Uganda and South Sudan and places I've been. But yeah, South Sudan, there's a long way to go. There's a lot of need. The orange hairs you talked about, yeah, remember that. But it's the newest country in the world, and there's just a lot of stuff happening. But the people there are pretty amazing, and I got to talk with some from the Dinka tribe, the Nuer tribe, and together, and just the stories. It's pretty incredible. We could talk a long time about that, but
yeah,
for those who might not even know where South Sudan is, I just want to highlight South Sudan as much as I can because it gets often overlooked because it is complicated. So, but all right, let's talk about the program itself. So we, looked at these 372. This was 2 years ago now. We work in iterations every year. We look at our portfolio. So you guys had we're launching a 2-year program in Magui, South Sudan, which is right on the border of Uganda. So I got to go there a couple of years ago and see it. But this 2-year program come alongside 250 households. So you guys work with households. It was a $120,000 program, so about less than $500 a household. And that program ended in September, October of 2024, and successfully came out of the portfolio because it completed. And you guys did an impact evaluation on that. Got a group. They did a survey with people who went through the program. I think they surveyed like 101 folks, which makes the math nice and easy. But It's pretty. It's a long report, but just looking back at that report, it's pretty incredible, Joy, the numbers there. So I'd love to share those. But I mean, from your perspective on the program itself, just from internally at Farm Stew, how did it go for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it was powerful. And we had some just fantastic people serving as our trainers, people that have been serving with us for several years and knew the communities. But with this project, we moved into new communities that had never heard of Farm Stew before. And to be looking at the data and to see that after the 2 years in this land where, it's practically at famine level for most of the people most of the time, to have 97% of them say, we now have enough to eat.
Yep.
And then to have them say overall on average that their household income was raised 8 times.
Yep.
That's multiplication, And I like to say God is a God of multiplication. And so to have their income raised 8 times, and we know from some other data that even the church tithe in a different area, this is not in the Magui project area, but it had raised 450%. So, if tithe is 10% of what you give, or what you earn, that's just powerful. And so not only are they making more money, but they're actually using it for good, meaning they're not just taking it and buying junk food and, little shots of alcohol, which is sadly what happens often when development work happens and there's not a spiritual or discipleship component to it. You can actually make people worse off by what they can buy with the extra income. So yeah, we're really thrilled about it. And that is also the model that they don't need us forever. And so as much as we want to do another project with All Access, we do need to move on to the next community because we're not trying to create the dependency or the handout mentality that frankly just is a bottomless pit.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So what it looks like on the ground, with you guys, it's a 2-year program. You have, local trainers come alongside these 250 households who are training them, what crops to, grow best in those areas, where they're the most nutritious, how to sell those. You do, savings groups. So start village and savings loans associations where they can, pull their savings together, make loans to each other in the group, which, a lot of groups are doing across Africa, but it's a really, really neat program. And then helping with sanitation and hygiene, which those in disease prevention know, water access is great, but if you're not, addressing sanitation and hygiene, that it doesn't impact that disease as much as you hope. So, you guys are addressing all of these, that discipleship, behavior, temperance, and I've got some of the numbers. So you mentioned the 97% of households reported now having sufficient food to feed their families. That's a big deal, really big deal. The other number, the 8 times average household increased their income by 8 times, and that's a conservative estimate. Joy, as we were looking at that report and doing the numbers, it's kind of pushing like 12 or 13, but it's, they fall in categories. So when they're answering that survey, it's like, okay, if you're making between these two and these two. And so I conservatively calculated 8, just to not oversell, but 8 times, that's a big deal. Can you imagine that 8 times? And then what was the last one? Oh, it was the increase in number of households having 3 meals per day, which is another big deal. 3 meals per day in a developing country is huge. It went from 3% of people before the program were eating 3 meals a day to now 60%. 50%, 57% increase in the number of households. Pretty amazing. So
Yeah. And I wish your listeners could see some pictures. If they go to farmstew.org and /newsletters, we wrapped up this project in the third quarter of 2024. So it's right there. And I'm just looking at the picture of the article. It's called Help Restored Families Flourishing. And I think that's a great summary of what this project was able to do, is just really restore the hope of the people there. And when you talked about the Village Saving and Loan Association, that is an incredibly powerful tool. And it's kind of sounds like a big word, but basically you're going into communities and creating community banking, where in its absence, the only way to get money, if you need money, is from a very predatory lender. And that often leads to bankruptcy and leads to people losing their homes and, and even their land and everything. And the opposite of being part of this Village Savings and Loan Association, they actually each week when the trainer comes and trains on a lesson, they will meet and they will actually have a club where everybody's putting in a certain amount of money. And then the group can actually take loans on that money, and they charge interest, but the interest ultimately goes to everybody in that group. And so it's actually an incredible way to increase capital. And they're using their own money. And we have stories where the communities were saying, well, why doesn't the organization put money in? And actually, in our most recent newsletter, there was a guy in South Sudan saying, at the start, we just thought this was ridiculous because we don't have any money here. What are you talking about saving money? We don't have any. And in that community, I actually edited it out of the newsletter because I thought it sounded almost unbelievable. But that little club in a year had raised $20,000 in a community where they thought everybody was dirt poor. And I'm like, it was like amazing to me. But you have 50 people in a household, so it's, but it's the first time they've ever had a banking system or even be able to think conceptually about the future in a way that is proactive and positive. So. Yeah.
Wow.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, you're right. And I remember one of the first stories we got from the field about this program was the story of some twins, I believe twin girls, who, obviously having a baby in a developing country, specifically the poorest country in the world, South Sudan, is difficult, but having two at the same time is fatal, mostly in most circumstances. So, I remember seeing the pictures of the babies when they just joined the program wasn't good. And then I don't know if it was 3 months, 6 months later, you see these plump kids, and it was just so cool to see.
Actually, I'm going to share my screen, but it's funny. That's exactly what I'm looking at right here, because that was the first quarter. If you do screen share, you're maybe not everybody's, it's a podcast, but
I don't know how to do it, to be honest, Joy. But yeah, it's
right there on the farmstew.org/newsletter. That's from the first quarter of 2024 is the story of these twins. And literally when I first heard about these twins, I didn't even publish the story with both of them because I kind of had to assume they were so skin and bones, and like their little buttocks where you should have little round buttocks, it was like drapes of skin. And oh Lord, it's just amazing. Our trainers have such big hearts, and we try to pay living wages. And our trainers actually took some of their own money and helped this family have some supplemental food. We usually don't hand out any food, but in this dire circumstance, our trainers' hearts were just so big. They did the right thing. And yeah, these girls on the cover of this newsletter here are in these cute little dresses, and they have little plump cheeks, and we don't show their buttocks, but I'm sure they're plump too. And yeah, praise God, because who knows what those little girls are going to grow up and do with their lives or what they're called to do. And we want to help them reach their potential.
Yeah. And this is why why it's important to go and find really effective programs, and not look at who's the most marketed or most popular, this or that, but the programs that are actually moving the needle the most in these places. And because of this story and all the people the data we talked about represent. So, Joy, thank you for what you're doing. Keep it up with Farm Stew. We love it. And just encourage everybody, farmstew.org, go learn more about them. It's really cool, interesting model. I hope more groups pick it up and take what you guys have proven and run with it. But Joy, thanks for joining me today.
You're so welcome. And I do want to say other groups, if there's people listening that are running an NGO, I do want to say we make our curriculum available free online. And if your organization wants to, use this Bible-based holistic curriculum, you're welcome to do so. Just send me a note, joy@farmstew.org. And but anybody can take the course anywhere in the world for free. And we are very thankful to be able to share it. And thank you, Lane, for giving us this platform to share with your listening audience. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joy, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. God bless.